Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Connecticut's Old State House. We're so happy to see you here despite all the rain. Thank you for coming down. My name is Mariana Garcia. I'm the Public Programs Manager here at Connecticut's Old State House, and I just want to welcome you all to our program, Before the Meme, A History of Political Cartoons with Professor Matt Warshauer. This program, we planned it with Matt to accompany our new traveling exhibit, which you might have noticed right across the hall. The exhibit is titled Running for Office, Candidates, Campaigns, and the Cartoons of Clifford Berryman. And it features 44 prints of the cartoons that Berryman composed during his career. He was an early 20th century cartoonist, and the exhibit highlights the timeless aspects of American campaigns and politics. And it really shows how cartoons are just as much part of the political process as any of the laws that were passed here in this building back when it was the State House of Connecticut. So we have a bunch of programs planned to accompany this exhibit. You might have noticed all of the flyers that you have around in the chairs. We prepared a season of programs titled Go Big, Vote Local. And we have lots of programs coming up. I hope we get to see you in some of them in the next couple of weeks, couple of months. And I just want to introduce Matt, who will be giving us a really, really fun and really cool overview of the history of political cartoons here in the United States. So Dr. Matthew Warshauer is a professor of history at Central Connecticut State University, where he specializes in American political and constitutional history. He is the author of 5 books: Andrew Jackson and the Politics of Martial Law, Andrew Jackson in Context, Connecticut in the American Civil War, Slavery, Sacrifice, and Survival, Inside Connecticut and the Civil War, and most recently, Creating and Failing the 9/11 Generation, which should be out in 2023. Is it out already? Huh? Not yet, but soon in 2023.
With my publisher today.
Okay, yeah, well, keep your eyes peeled for that one. So Matt has received numerous awards for his research and teaching, and is a sought-after speaker in a variety of topics, and has a particular knack for connecting history with the difficulties we face in the contemporary society. So now, Matt, please.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate your time, and especially considering that you probably had to rent a raft or a canoe or something like that to get here. I had students coming into classes today literally drenched, soaking wet. And so I have a couple of students here, I have a colleague, I have a variety of friends here. So thank you very much for spending your time. You recognize this? That's Dr. Seuss, right? When I love to use cartoons in teaching and in public presentations, because people are generally not afraid to analyze and tell you what they think about an image or a cartoon. They find it very disarming. If I put up here the Andrew Jackson's nullification proclamation against South Carolina and started breaking down sections of it, your eyes would most likely roll back in your head. And I actually have a course right now, U.S. Political History, where my students are reading all of the inaugural addresses from George Washington to Rutherford B. Hayes. And it's going to take me 3 weeks to get them used to the language and the writing of the time, because it's almost like a foreign language. Okay? But cartoons, we can all approach cartoons and explore them. Dr. Seuss is probably the most easily identifiable cartoonist in American history. Most people do not know. And it's interesting because it extends across the generations. You recognize it, but my students who are 18 and 19 also recognize Dr. Seuss. What most people don't realize is that in the run-up to World War II, before the United States got involved, he was heavily, heavily involved in the pro-war movement to get the United States involved in World War II when we were still being very, very isolationist and not wanting to join the war. So Seuss is a fascinating character, as is the exhibit in the other room, Clifford Berryman. Berryman created images from 1891 to 1949, 15,000 images, right? I learned that from reading the first placard in there when I walked in, right? But Berryman was amazing, and I said this to Gerald, I wish that I could draw, right? because then I could be a brutal satirist, right? But I can't draw, really not even a stick figure very well, right? When you look at the cartoons in the other room, you'll find out that they're actually very, very kind. They're not particularly mean-spirited. This is why Berryman was able to get along with people on both sides of the aisle. He has a lot of images of both Republicans and Democrats, lots of images of the traditional Democratic donkey, the traditional GOP or Grand Old Party elephant. My job tonight is to place the history of political cartoons in a longer context that ultimately lead to Berryman. Because as I said, Berryman was quite polite in his drawings. A lot of the cartoons I'm going to show you are not nearly as polite. They're much, much more brutal and much more on the partisan scale. Okay? So let's take a look. There we go. So this is actually not an American cartoon. And it's tough, and I'm going to show you some bigger images of this, but it's tough with this sort of smaller screen. So do the best you can. Right? So this is a print on the South Sea scheme. It's actually done in London in 1721. And the point is not to dig into this particular cartoon, but I wanted to show you something from the early 18th century and the degree to which it really was artwork, right? The level of detail and the level of commentary. If you go and look at the cartoons, Berryman's cartoons in the other room, the actual things that the characters are saying is very, very brief. This and many of the political cartoons we're going to be looking at are not extremely brief. They dive headlong into the politics, the partisanship, really the rancor of the time. And what's really fascinating, if you go into the Berryman exhibit, you'll look at a lot of different cartoons, and depending on what your age is or your historical knowledge, you may or may not understand the sort of thematic thrust of what Berryman is getting at. The same is true of all of these cartoons. Today, I can use a cartoon like this as a primary source with my classes, break it down, provide the context behind it, discuss what the intention of the artist was. But again, if you don't know any of that background, these cartoons can be a mystery to us, right? But for the people living at the time, they would have understood every single bit of what was going on here. Oh, here is a little bit more of a close-up, just so that you can see the level of detail that exists here, right? And also in terms of the technology to produce this. It's printing press that we're talking about. This is an etching that would have to have ink placed on it and then a single piece of paper at a time in order to be able to produce it. And then look at the amount of commentary that is on it. And again, my point for this particular cartoon is not to read all of this and discuss the background and context. I just wanted you to see a really, really early political cartoon and how detailed it is and how this would have been produced and passed around sort of the city square and in taverns, and it would have been put up places, and people would have been going and looking at it, and it would have been explained to people, because there's plenty of people who are not literate, and therefore the image is that much more important. This is possibly the oldest American political cartoon. Right? This is done by Benjamin Franklin. It is most often equated with the American Revolution, but this is actually not from the American Revolution. It's from the French and Indian War, or what is sometimes called the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763, when the British North American colonies and Britain proper throughout the world and in Europe was doing battle against France, and the main outcome of that war was winning the entire North American continent. This is when Britain takes over control of Canada from the French. Right? And so this is done by Franklin, and it is, as you see, join or die. It is an American snake. The American snake has been portrayed in a lot of ways and very, very contemporary ways, right? The Don't Tread on Me flag, the Gadsden flag, has been really embraced as a conservative symbol, and in particular in regards to the Second Amendment and gun rights. Right? So, and here what you see is the head of the snake is New England, and then you've got a section of New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, North Carolina, South Carolina. All segments of the snake that must come together, and we must unite or we will die as British colonies, right? It gets resurrected for the American Revolution and is used again. And this is what, there we go. I have clicker issues. Right? So this is the American Revolution. This is called the Massachusetts Spy, or Thomas's Boston Journal, clearly a newspaper of Boston. It is printed by Paul Revere. The British are coming, the British are coming. Some people know that Revere was a printmaker. He was also an engraver. So it would have been very easy for him to take images from the past, such as the snake, which you see all along here. And this is absolutely a version of Benjamin Franklin's snake. You also see it facing off a griffin, which is representative of Great Britain at the time. And you see the female figure of Liberty in the upper left corner. And again, it's a rattlesnake, and it says join or die. This time, it's not for the French and Indian War, but for the American Revolution. This one is one I love. And we're coming upon the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. This coming December, there is going to be a 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party this coming December. I will be going to Massachusetts for that. And so this is the American Revolution, the Bostonians paying the excise man or tarring and feathering. Right? This is created as a mezzotint, right? And it's Italian for halftone. So it's a copper plate that's been worked over with a very fine-tooth comb to put to rough it. And then you place ink on it, the paper goes on top of it, and that's how it's created. You can see it's pretty good artwork in terms of that kind of a technique. It's really kind of neat. And I want to show you a close-up of this. The quality here isn't fantastic, but you can see they are pouring tea into his mouth. Now, this is pre-Boston Tea Party, okay? This is pre-Boston Tea Party. He is covered with feathers. He has also been tarred. You can see a noose up in the background, and you can see ships in the distance, and they're dumping tea. Right? Interesting, right? So this is really pretty interesting. And when I talk to my students about tarring and feathering, they always sort of snicker. Tarring and feathering. Tarring and feathering is not funny, right? Not if you're the recipient, I should say. Right? So, and I often ask people, have you ever done any roofing work? You ever gotten any tar on you? When it dries, even when it doesn't dry, it is not easy to get off, and it usually takes whatever hair it's on, and maybe even a little bit of skin. This is the stuff of tarring and feathering. And this is, you're talking about the Sons of Liberty, and I should note that this was created in London, so it's an anti-American cartoon to show the violence of the colonies towards British tax collectors. There's that close-up of it. Here we have our American rattlesnake again. This time, it's at the end of the American Revolution. This one is created again in England. It's not necessarily really an anti-American one the way the last one was, but it is showing that the American snake has surrounded Cornwallis's troops at Yorktown, and they have been completely surrounded. And this is a rattlesnake, and you can even see the rattle. It's a little more detailed than some of the other ones. But it's almost like it's constricting around Cornwallis's troops. And I will show you some of what it says. An apartment to let for military general. Right? So, meaning the British aren't going to be around very long after this because they've lost the war. So this is one of the things about political cartoons. They incorporate humor. Okay? The British armies I have thus burgoyned, and room for more I've got behind. That's the snake speaking. Anybody recognize what the term Burgoyne would mean? General Burgoyne at the Battle of Saratoga, defeating the British at the Battle of Saratoga. If any of you are from West Hartford and you've been to Elmwood, Elmwood is called Elmwood because they plant elm trees in recognition of Burgoyne's victory at Saratoga. Right? So then it says, Britons within the Yankean plains, mind how ye march and trench. Right? The serpent in the Congress reigns as well as in the French. So it's all these subtle barbs that are within this image about the British defeat at Yorktown. This one I absolutely love. I did not know that this cartoon even existed, and I would have to argue, I know my early political cartoons. I was tooling through the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress, and this is the great thing about the internet, their prints and photograph division, I don't even have the right adjective. It's phenomenal. Any subject that you are interested in, you can go to the Library of Congress Prints and Photograph Division, do a keyword search of it, and find all of the various things related to it. If you're, whatever period of history that you're interested in, they either have cartoons or prints or photographs. They have an outstanding World War I posters collection of posters and broadsides that would have been put up to build American support for World War I. Same thing for World War II. It's a remarkable collection. So when I was working on the PowerPoint for this presentation, I came across this one, and I didn't even know it existed. And one of the reasons I wanted to incorporate it is because it's specifically related to Connecticut. Right? This is a cartoon that is about the Federalist versus anti-Federalist argument over the ratification of the American Constitution. The Federalists were in favor of ratifying the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists were opposed to ratifying the Constitution. And there's a lot of stuff out there on that, not, however, that many cartoons. And certainly I didn't know that there was one about Connecticut. So this is called The Looking Glass for 1787, created by a guy named Amos Doolittle, New Haven, 1787, engraving and rocker work with watercolor on laid paper. Right? So it is, again, a metal engraving with ink on it and then a rocker that rocks back and forth to create the print. And these would have been created, again, like a small poster that would have been hung up in various places. All of the coloring on it is hand-colored, and every single one of them that they produced that was hand-colored, each one of them is colored. They did not have the ability to reproduce the way that we do today. Right? So I'm going to break this down for you in a bunch of different slides. I've broken it up in a variety of ways, but I want to point some things out before I do that. So this is the wagon. This is Connecticut. It's stuck in the mud right here. This is the Federalist faction pulling one way. This is the Anti-Federalist faction pulling the other way. Right? The Anti-Federalists are pulling towards destruction. Okay? And then you've got various important characters here that I will identify as we go along. It's called the Council of 12. These are the Council of 12 who are in charge of the Connecticut, the colony turned state. Right? I did not push it that many times. I'm telling you, I have clicker issues. Hold on. Wow, it really went crazy. Now I've ruined the whole presentation. I should just stop. Okay, so here is a better view without any writing on it, right? You can see it up a little bit closer, right? And then we'll break it down a little bit closer still. See if this thing works. Okay, there we go. Let's see if we can hold on to this clicker. All right? So there you can see it a little bit closer. Notice the trousers down, and the chatting has begun. All right? So as I said, some of these cartoons are not nearly as polite as Clifford Perriman's in the other room. Right? These are two men pointing and aiming at one another, along with a skunk that's pointing and aiming back, right? And I'll break this down a little bit, right? So Connecticut is symbolized by a wagon loaded with debts and paper money, the weight of which causes it to slowly sink into the mud. And I just want to say one thing. As I read these descriptions, I want you to think about contemporary American politics a little bit, okay? So its driver warns, "Gentlemen, this machine is deep in the mire, and you are divided as to its relief." The wagon is pulled in opposite directions by two factions of the state's Council of 12. On the left, under a beaming sun, are 5 federal councilors who proclaim, "Pay commutation," pay taxes, pay, right? "Drive them to it. I abhor the anti-federal faction." These are all the things that are being set up here, right? And comply with Congress. On the right, the sky fills with angry storm clouds spewing thunderbolts while the earth erupts in flames. Below, 6 of the county's anti-federal members pull on their chain crying, "Tax luxury. The people are oppressed. Curses on to federal government. Success to Shays," which is an allusion to Shays' rebellion. Right? So again, the politics of this period, the people would have gone, "I understand exactly what's going on here." And then there's one, "Curse independence." Right? The 7th anti-federal in the council, right? This guy, where is he? Right here. William Williams. Doug, Nina, do you know who William Williams was? He was on the Connecticut Supreme Court. Right? He was one of the early revolutionaries. And sure, Doug. Nina, you give it to him later for me, okay? I miss your laugh, Nina. So William Williams, here labeled with his press pseudonym, Agricola. It was very, very common at this time to write under a pseudonym. All of the Federalist Papers were signed Publius, or the public. Okay? He also appears. He stands defecating at right with his trousers undone and a small animal, probably a skunk, between his feet. Williams remarks, "I fear and dread the Ides of May," meaning the May 15 elections to the upper house of Connecticut. The skunk sprays towards Williams' enemy, Samuel Holden Parsons, identified as SHP, president of the State Society of the Cincinnati. The Society of the Cincinnati is an organization formed to honor George Washington. Also obscenely bending over, sprays back saying, "A good shot." In left middle ground, Cato, a pseudonymous contributor to the New Haven Gazette, comments, "I despise your copper." Right? What would the copper be? It would be the copper coins that are created by the colony of Connecticut with the approval, early on they were given the approval by Great Britain to create coppers, because under the British mercantile system, very little gold and silver was allowed to come to the colonies. And so we are actually quite a cash-poor state. So we don't like coppers because they don't really amount to anything, and we don't like paper money. Okay? And then it says, "I despise your copper," to the man beside him, "who holds a Connecticut coin and mutters, 'Curse commutation.'" Right? So again, this is very, very detailed. Right? So now you see, if you see the image, the previous, there's the farmer, right? There's the close-up of the farmer. He's got a bottle of something. There's a plow. He's got a rake in his hand. In the center, a farmer with a plow, rake, and bottle complains, "Takes all to pay taxes." In the left foreground, 3 members of the Connecticut Wits stand on the Mount Parnassus and read from a scroll, "American Antiquities." Okay? To the right is Connecticut shoreline and the buildings of Manhattan. You can see that here. Here's Manhattan. Here's the shoreline with ships. The latter threatened by thunderbolts from the upper right. 3 merchant vessels ply a body of water below from Connecticut to New York, paying $40,000 per annum impost. So this is about taxes and taxation, and that if you create a federal government and the Constitution is passed, it's going to cost us even more. Right? And in the left corner, a tiny figure sits at a writing desk reading a paper with the verse, "Tweedle's study as I sit plodding by my taper." This piece alludes to a satirical poem by Trustless Fox in the New Haven Gazette of November 23, 1786. So again, one of the points here is the level of detail. Somebody spent a lot of time and was angrily humorous, shall we say, about what he wanted to get across, and he really wanted to poke fun at people, and this would have upset quite a number of people. Now we move on. Thomas Jefferson. Now we're moving into more the early national period. Jefferson is president. This is 1804. If you by chance know the story of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, the enslaved young woman who lived with Jefferson, he was Jefferson's wife's servant and therefore joined Jefferson's home when they married. He was also Jefferson's wife's half-sister. Okay? And Jefferson struck up a relationship with Sally Hemings. This was much disputed among American historians. The historiography on Jefferson, meaning how historians have written about Jefferson, has changed more in the last 25 years than in the last 250 years, primarily because of his liaison and relationship with Sally Hemings. It was always bandied about, usually as a weapon against Jefferson. This is the very first extremely public outing of Jefferson in regards to this matter. Jefferson historians and biographers always argued that it never happened, it was untrue, until a little thing called DNA came along. Right? And for a long time, Jefferson descendants, male descendants, would not give up the DNA to have the testing done. Around 1999, somebody from that side of the family did, and it was proven. And you want to see some Jefferson historians make 180-degree turns very, very quickly and go, oh my. I remember that one of the major movie companies decided to come out with a two-part miniseries called Thomas and Sally, A Love Affair Never Told. Historians went crazy over this and said, you don't know what this relationship was. The power dynamic was so out of balance here. And for all we know, this was decades of forced sex, right? But Jefferson did father, I think it's 5 children with Sally Hemings, the only enslaved people that he freed at the end of his life. Yeah. I do not believe so. I do not believe so. So it's a philosophic cock. A cock at this time period would have been somebody who's sort of going around and preening and showing off, right? So there's Jefferson as the cock, there's Sally, and it depicts Jefferson as a preening rooster, right? Sally Hemings is the hen. The text from the first scene of Act 1 of Joseph Addison's drama Cato, "'Tis not a set of features or complexion or tincture of a skin that I admire." This is the President of the United States getting ready to run for president again. This is extremely dangerous to do this, especially in the aftermath of the Alien and Sedition Acts. Right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. But this is, again, a remarkable, remarkable political statement that would not have been taken kindly, certainly by Jefferson or anybody in the Republican Party under Jefferson. And again, this would have been created with an engraving and hand-colored. Okay? And honestly, we have no idea. There's no way to tell how many of these would have been printed. But we are at the height of the newspaper wars at this time. And newspapers have come into being literally party organs by this time. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. The political parties were actually hiring newspaper editors and others to fire slings and arrows at their enemies. And in fact, it was largely Jefferson who started it. Because when he was Secretary of State under Washington, he invited Philip Freneau, that's a different talk, Philip Freneau to Philadelphia, gave him a job in the State Department, and said, by the way, we have the letter, says, by the way, you're not going to be so busy translating documents. You might have time to, say, edit a newspaper and, hint, hint, attack Alexander Hamilton at every chance you possibly get, right? Doug, what are you doing to my clicker here? There we go. I love this one. We're moving along. War of 1812. Second War of Independence against Great Britain. Right? War of 1812, a boxing match or another bloody nose for John Bull. Americans referred to England as John Bull. Right? This is etching, and again, an etching on a copper plate, hand-colored. Right? I'm going to show you a close-up of this. Okay? This is the king raining a waterfall of blood from his nose against little Jemmy Madison, the president at the time. And the king is saying, "Stop, stop, brother Jonathan, or I shall fall with the loss of blood. I thought to have been too heavy for you, but I must acknowledge your superior skill. 2 blows to my 1, and so well directed too. Mercy, mercy on me. How does this happen?" Madison is responding, Johnny, you thought yourself a boxer, did you? I'll let you know we are an enterprising nation and ready to meet you with equal force any day. What's the enterprising mean in this? Nope. Where's Captain Kirk? Where's Captain Kirk? He's on the Enterprise, right? Captain Kirk is out at sea, battling a British vessel. The British vessels are generally bigger than the American vessels, but the Americans' naval vessels at the beginning of the War of 1812 actually do very, very well against the British Navy, and they win a number of matches. There's a whole series of War of 1812 cartoons that make plays on the names of ship vessels and play around with them. So the idea, you do know I'm kidding. Captain Kirk was not actually in the War of 1812. Though, in Star Trek, there was sometimes time travel, so we're not sure for certain, okay? But I love this one because it's the king getting beaten up. And this stuff, cartoons are just rare enough at this time that this would have gotten around. And I guarantee to you that the king and those in Parliament saw this and were not amused. Okay? They did get their comeuppance when they went into Washington in August of 1814 and burned it to the ground. Okay? This one, again, is another one that I love from the War of 1812. A scene on the frontier as practiced by the humane British and their worthy allies. You'll see the name William Charles. He seems to be the artist of note for the War of 1812. He does quite a number of images. And here in this image, you can see the British, and the British are often depicted as sort of fat, overbearing, pompous types. And you can see the British and Indians in the background, Native Americans in the background, dancing around a fire. And he's giving scalps, and you can see there is the process of scalping right there. Right? And he's handing scalps, the gun, reward for 16 scalps. Okay? Scalping is actually very much a European invention and way of getting Native Americans to know that they have killed someone, the French and the English use Native Americans as their fighting forces and allies, and they would say, when you kill them, scalp them and bring me the scalps. And then they would trade based on that. So look at what this says. Bring me the scalps, and the king, our master, will reward you. Reward for 16 scalps. This is an American-made cartoon meant to arouse the people of America. This is what's happening. The British are brutal, and they're unleashing these savage natives against us. So it's arise, Columbia's sons, and forward press. Your country's wrongs called loudly for redress. The savage Indian with his scalping knife or tomahawk may seek to take your life. By bravery awed, they ill in a dread fright shrunk back from refuge to the woods in flight. Their British leaders then will quickly shake, and for those wrongs shall restitution make. I'm not arguing it's the greatest poetry in the world, right? But it would have appealed to the patriotism of Americans at the time. These were also created in color, right? Because remember, it's not only a political message, but it's modern artwork. And people at this time, there's not that much artwork out there. For all of us, we can pull our phones out and in a second pull up 1,000 different images at our fingertips. At this time, art is something that is not really around. Only the wealthy have art. And political cartooning, by around mid-19th century, starts to become not high art, but common art, where they start producing it for people's homes so that they have something that can hang up in the home. And you know who the leaders of that movement were? The Kellogg brothers, right here in Hartford, Connecticut. And I'll show you some images by them. This, again, is a great one. The Hartford Convention. Anybody know what's important about this place? This is where the Hartford Convention occurred, right? So what was the Hartford Convention? Towards the end of the War of 1812, so the winter of 1814 into 1815, the New England states were largely Federalist. They had been very opposed to America's involvement in a second war with Britain, the War of 1812. And they were really, really upset about how the Republican administration was handling, or rather mishandling, the war. Washington, D.C. had been burned to the ground, and the Federalists thought, we need to have a meeting. We're going to meet in Hartford over the winter of 1814, 1815, and we're going to create a list of demands on the Madison administration, and we're going to tell them what's what. And if they don't accede to our demands, well, maybe we'll just create our own little confederacy, and we'll separate ourselves from Great Britain. Right? Some people argue that it was the first threat of secession. The reality is that it was primarily moderates who were in control of the Hartford Convention. But the cool thing is, it happened right here in this building, right upstairs on that side of the building in the Senate chamber. What's that? All the New England states were here, right? So it really was a significant meeting. For the 200th anniversary of the Hartford Convention, I was telling Gerald, I did a show here with Colin McEnroe and the state historian Walt Woodward, and we talked about the Hartford Convention from the Senate room where the Hartford Convention happened. Listen, you might not be excited about that, but I'm a historian geek. I thought it was the coolest thing on the planet, right? So this is called the Hartford Convention, or Leap or No Leap. This is jabbing at New England. This is an anti-Federalist, anti-Hartford Convention cartoon. There is the king saying, leap to me, my boys. Come to me. Separate from the rest of the Union and come back to merry old England. Right? So what are they saying? Rhode Island, poor little I, what will become of me? This leap is of a frightful size. I sink into despondency. Connecticut, I cannot, brother Mass. Let me pray and fast some time longer. Little Rhode Island will jump the first. Now, that's a dig at our Puritan origins. I'll pray and fast a little longer and see what God tells me to do. Massachusetts, what a dangerous leap. But we must jump, brother Connecticut. Timothy Pickering, who was a Massachusetts politician who helped to organize the Hartford Convention, is on his knees. I strongly and most firmly pray for the success of this great leap, which will change my vulgar name into that of my Lord of Essex. Right? God save the king. And then you've got the king saying Otis, and this is Harrison Gray Otis, again, a politician from Massachusetts. Massachusetts causes all the problems, Gerald. Right? Gerald studies Massachusetts politics. As he says, not I, this is not a profanity, the massholes start everything. Right? Otis, my Yankee boys, jump in, my fine fellows. Plenty of molasses and codfish, plenty of goods to smuggle, honors, titles, and nobility into the bargain. And then there's a medallion over here on the side, and the ribbon reads, this is the produce of the land they wish to abandon. they're going to lose all of these things. The medallion is scribed with the names of Perry, McDonough, Hull, and other heroes of the War of 1812. So these are the American generals and naval captains that have done well in the war. So this is a definite backslap to the Hartford Convention. Again, created into real art that people would have put up in various places. This most certainly was on the wall of taverns and public centers. Okay. We move on to the Jacksonian period. This is the real beginnings of American political cartooning. And it has to do with new technology, in particular, the creation of lithographs, where they are taking a stone, usually a piece of limestone, and they're using, they're tracing out with wax on the limestone this intricate design. Then they put the ink on it, and wherever the wax isn't, that's where the ink is soaked up when the paper goes on it. And it sounds like a tremendously complex process to me, but it's way, way easier to create than having to take a piece of copper and etch each piece onto a piece of metal. And they're able to reproduce over and over and over again. You're also talking about the time of the development of the steam-powered printing press. Okay? So technology has really improved. Lots more newspapers are being produced. Lots more cartoons are being produced. Okay? And so this is King Andrew I. It's 1833. The federal Constitution is under Jackson's feet. The coat of arms of Pennsylvania, where the Bank of the United States, the main branch, is located. This is about Jackson's power as President of the United States, his veto of the recharter of the Bank of the United States. Jackson had had a massive war with the Bank of the United States. And the most simple way for me to explain it to you without keeping you here for 2 weeks is to have us remember the financial crisis, the recession of 2008. Are there institutions that have too much power over our economic system? And what should the government do about those things? That's what Jackson's position on the Bank of the United States was. He says, this bank has far too much power over us, and I'm going to kill it. Right? Jackson at one point is literally laying on the couch in the Oval Office, and Martin Van Buren, his vice president, comes in, and he says, President, are you all right? And Jackson looks up and literally croaks. The bank, Mr. Van Buren, is trying to kill me, but I will kill it. Right? I love doing Jackson. Right? He's not the greatest guy in the world. He's got a lot of problems, but he's really interesting. Right? So the book is The Judiciary, United States Lies Nearby. Right? Around the border are printed the words, of veto memory. Jackson vetoes more bills than all of the previous presidents combined. He is the first president to recognize the true power of the veto. Hence, he is titled King Andrew I. Okay? And then it's the other part says, had I been consulted. And this is about the bank. Had I been consulted, this bank bill never would have come forward. Okay? So there you see a little bit better close, but you can see the robes, the scepter, the crown. Jackson is very often made out in these cartoons to look like a sort of haggard old woman. And you'll see more of this as we move along. This is the coffin handbill. Here's an example of a cartoon that is both cartoon but also heavily, heavily included is a lot of information. What is the coffin handbill? It comes out when Jackson runs for the presidency in 1828. It is produced by this guy, John Binns. When Jackson was a military commander, a general in the Tennessee militia, he leads a group of militia into Alabama and the Mississippi region to fight the Creek Indians during the War of 1812. His soldiers, some of them decide that their term of service is up and they want to go home. And so they raid the camp stores while Jackson is away from the camp, take some food, and march off. Jackson returns to the camp, finds out what happens, takes his troops, goes after them, captures all of them, has a court holding right there in the field, and he executes all 6 militiamen. Historians and Jackson's political opponents have disputed this, argued about this, said Jackson is brutal. Guess what Jackson didn't have problems with anymore? Mutinying soldiers, right? And he goes on to win the Battle of New Orleans, which up until the American Civil War is celebrated annually on January 8th and is the greatest American military victory. We defeat the most significant army that the British ever send to the United States. These are guys who defeat Napoleon, right? And they come down to New Orleans, and Jackson wipes the field with them, right? So Jackson is this man of paradoxes, but political cartooning, as a true art form, and really around a lot more, begins with the Jacksonian era. Right? This is again in regards to the bank war. Right? Here you have Jackson literally holding an order for the removal of the federal deposits. Not only does he veto the bank, he withdraws all of America's deposits from the national bank to make sure that it's dead. And here he is holding it up, and you can see lightning bolts. This is a version of what we would call Uncle Sam today. Lightning bolts coming out. These are the pillars of the Bank of the United States. It's a very sort of traditional Roman-looking building, and it's crumbling. This is the president of the bank, Nicholas Biddle, as the devil. You can see horns on him. He's got hooves. And all these politicians are scrambling and running away from the power of Jackson's veto. It's the downfall of Mother Bank. And then all of these are various newspaper names: Courier and Inquirer, the National Intelligencer, and there's all amounts of money that are on them. Why? Because Jackson was right. The bank got heavily involved in politics, tried to use its power to defeat him in the election of 1832, spends upwards of $100,000 in that election to defeat Jackson, and yet he still wins. And $100,000 in 1832 is a lot of money, right? So let's look at, here's a better close-up of this, and you can see the various newspapers. These are politicians that are running away, and what do they have to say? Major Jack Downing, and this is an apocryphal character. I must act in this case with energy and decision. You see the downfall of the party engine and corrupt monopoly. Hurrah, General. If this don't beat skunking, I'm an N-word. Only see that varmint Nick Biddle. How spry he is. He runs along like a Weatherfield hog with an onion in his mouth. That's a reference to Wethersfield, Connecticut. A Wethersfield hog. Wethersfield's famous for its onions, right? All the way back to the colonial period. So Connecticut makes another appearance, right? Order for the removal of public money and deposit in the United States. Daniel Webster from Massachusetts, right? Often referred to as the godlike Daniel because of his oratorical skills. There is a tide in the affairs of men, as Shakespeare says. So, my dear Clay, look out for yourself. Daniel Webster and Henry Clay, prominent senators at this time, both in favor of the bank. They're scurrying off. Clay is saying, help me up, Webster, or I shall lose my stakes. So there's Clay, there's Webster. No more fees to be obtained here. I move we adjourn. Right? Nicholas Biddle, it is time for me to resign my presidency. Right? All of this would have been completely understood by the people of the time. Another image of Jackson fighting the bank. This is General Jackson, very well known for his cloak, his big hair, his little granny glasses, and his beaver skin cap with the black band on it that he wore for the rest of his life after his wife had a heart attack and passed away right before his presidential inauguration. This is the Hydra. Right? This is the giant snake with many, many heads, the story of the Hydra. All of the Hydra heads, Massachusetts, Delaware. Right? These are where all the branch banks are. Right? So there's an officer helping Jackson manage the Hydra. Jackson has his cane, which says veto on it. Jackson carried a sword cane. Right? He used it a couple of times. Right? He ran a guy named Samuel Jackson right through the back with it. Right? Jackson was the first president, as this might not come as a surprise the way that I'm describing him, to have a presidential assassination attempt against him. A guy pulls out not one pistol, but 2 pistols. They both go off and do not fire, and they believe it's because where he was in Washington, that it had been a damp day and all the powder was damp. But people do say that the odds of that are, the Secret Service did not exist, right? Did Jackson cower? No, he picked up his cane and went after the guy, right? This was Jackson. And I do have to say, one of my students about a year ago bought me a cane sword, so I'm very happy. I'm not going to go through TSA with it, right? So again, we have these things colored, right? This is the beginnings of the jackass, the Democratic donkey. Okay? Again, it's about the bank. This is the U.S. Bank. All of the chicks are the branch banks. Jackson has, I mean, come on, that's funny. He's crazed. Right? Here's Martin Van Buren, whose nickname, Doug, the Red Fox of Kinderhook, or the Sly Fox, right? Often the Little Magician as well. He was often also known, he had 3 nicknames, the Martin Van Ruin, because he was president during the 1837 economic panic. I once asked students on an exam, list for me 2 of Martin Van Buren's 3 nicknames. And the student writes, the Little Magician, Martin Van Uren. He got peed on a lot. That student got full credit, okay? And the last thing I will say is I drove to Niagara Falls this summer with my wife. I got tagged at 2 a.m. for speeding on the New York Thruway in Van Buren County, okay? When they sent me the actual ticket in the mail and it said Van Buren County, I was like, well, I'm going to have fun. I turned the envelope open and wrote the 3 nicknames of Martin Van Buren and sent the damn thing back. So there, that was my getting even, right? So let everyone take care of himself, as the jackass said when he was dancing among the chickens. This, again, is an anti-Jackson cartoon. And Jackson did what Jackson does so well, and that is turn slurs or attacks on their head. So they call Jackson a jackass, and Jackson says, the jackass, the donkey, loyal, hard-working. Right? He turns it on its head. Prior to this, opponents had called him a dangerous military chieftain. Jackson says, yes, I am a military chieftain. I have gone out in the field and sacrificed myself and seen soldiers sacrifice themselves while you politicians sit in the State House bickering. He was expert at turning these things on his head, on their head. There's a close-up of this, right? He looks like a lion. How dignified. Right? So he looks like a lion. How dignified. What correct steps in such good time. Can anything equal him? The greatest and best ass we ever knew. Right? Sing away, Major Downey. This is a capital experiment by the Interturtle. This is Major Jack Downey. Yankee Doodle Doo. Right? Sly is the word. U.S. Bank, branch bakes. I feel quite home on this dung heap, the Globe. So this is a pile of excrement. Anybody know what the Globe was? The Democratic Globe. Jackson's newspaper in Washington, D.C. He literally invites an editor to come, like Jefferson did, and like others. Most presidents and politicians actually had their own party organs and newspapers come to Washington to be their mouthpiece at this time. Some would argue that that's what Fox and CNN are here for. Right? Another one, now the donkey starts to become used regularly. A modern Balaam and his ass. Most of these were done by Henry Robinson, all Whig, all anti-Jackson. Right? The subject is the Panic of 1837. So this is actually after Jackson's out of the office. Van Buren is president. And many of the artistic and cartoon depictions of Van Buren are always following Jackson, always riding Jackson's coattails, always comments about how Jackson's nickname was Old Hickory, that little Martin Van Buren could only rise with the strength of the sap of the hickory tree, right? Things like this, right? Specie, curriculum, right? Here's a better example of this. You can see all the banks that are in the background of here. Wherefore hast thou smitten thine ass? Behold, I went out to protest thee. Thy way is perverse before me. Right? Because thou hast mocked me, I would there were a sword in my hand, for now would I veto thee. So again, he's got his cane sword, he's got his veto. Am not I thine ass upon which thou hast ridden ever since I was thine unto this day? That's the donkey, right? And then I shall tread in the footsteps of my illustrious predecessor. Always following Jackson. Bankruptcy 1837, the Regency, Safety Fund, Deposit Banks, Old Hickory, Uncle Sam, debt. Right? That's what this is about. Now we move on, and we're moving into a more modern era of lithography where it's moved beyond just politics, and it's now starting to become, as I mentioned before, sort of more contemporary art that the common American might be able to put into their home, right? And so this is the election of 1844 and its protection to American industry. You can see that the Kellogg brothers, Hartford, Connecticut, colored lithograph on woven paper. So this would, generally speaking, they're about this big. And in fact, if you go to the Connecticut Historical Society, which is the Connecticut Museum of Culture now, I can't keep track. Culture and history. I can't keep track of these. CLHO changed their name. Don't change the old State House's name, please. I know you're the Connecticut Democracy Center also. I know. So, but you can actually get reproductions of these at the Connecticut Historical Society. So, and look at the variety that they offer to Americans. Major scenes of American history, but also very simple scenes of American history too. So this is Pocahontas saving the life of John Smith. This literally would have been purchased by somebody, and again, every one of them produced through lithography, every one of them hand-colored. The Kellogg brothers employed women to do the hand-coloring. These would have been framed and placed on the wall of your home. Okay? And very, very simple scenes as well. Right? Dogs of a high degree. I know Doug has prints of his dog at home. Right? So this is simple, common artwork. But simple, common artwork is not generally available until the Kellogg brothers start mass producing it. My kitten. Right? So this would be Nina's picture. Right? How are your Siamese kitties doing? Right? The Kellogg brothers got very involved and invested in the Civil War, produced a tremendous number of pro-Union images during the war. This is the eagle's nest. The Union, it must and shall be preserved. Right? Anybody know whose quote that is? Everybody comes back to Jackson. Jackson said it in the nullification crisis of 1832. It says the Union, it must and shall be preserved. When the Union Army, or Navy rather, made its way up the Mississippi River and took over New Orleans in 1862, you know the Jackson Square in New Orleans, the giant Jackson on horseback statue, that had already been there since 1853. The Union Army comes in and chisels that saying into it. It's put in after the fact to send a message to the Confederates. Jackson was a Southerner, was a slave owner. He believed in the Union. Right? Very interesting. Right? Here is one of those examples. This is the Battle of Bull's Run, the first battle of the war, July 21st, 1861. And here you have Union forces fighting Confederate forces. Right? And again, this is home art for this time period. This would have been very common, right? This also is hanging in Doug's home, right? 16th President of the United States, 1861. Right? But we got a new technology that is coming forward now. Lithography is still very popular, but now photography is out there, right? And so, and what's remarkable about what Matthew Brady and Alex Gardner, who worked together, what they did with photography. Historians now know that scenes like this and like this, quite often what Brady and Gardner would do is they would actually set the scene, much like a modern photographer would do today. It's not just sort of, oh, I'll do a quick selfie, right? They're literally setting up rifles and bodies in particular places. Brady has a studio and a window in Manhattan where he starts placing these images of battle scenes. Right? And you know the fame of New York storefront window scenes, right? Imagine having never seen a photograph before, or photography being very new. You've seen a few photographs, and all of a sudden you're seeing photos of dead bodies, right? Think about what modern television during the Vietnam War does to the American public, right? And then what this does. Right? So what's also interesting, many soldiers, primarily Union soldiers, on their way to war would stop and have their photograph taken in uniform. Do you notice anything unique about that picture? What is the background? What's that? It's a painted background. It's a canvas. So does anybody remember when we were, most of us in here were kids, you could go to the mall and you could put on all the stuff and take pictures in front of the scene, the Western scene or something like that? That's what this is. Right? They're in their real uniforms, but they're going in front of a painted canvas. I was giving a Civil War talk years ago, and a woman brought me the picture of one of her ancestors framed, and I said, do you notice what's in the background? And this has been hanging on her walls for years. She goes, I never noticed that, right? So you got pictures of Lincoln, and now we get to Thomas Nast, right? The father of the modern political cartoon, right? Post-Civil War, Thomas Nast gives us the elephant, okay, for the Republican Party. So here is the donkey. Democrats were also, many of them were known as Copperheads, kicking a dead lion. This is Edwin Stanton, who was the Secretary of War under Lincoln. I'm not going to go too far into that background right now. Here is the image. This gives us the elephant. If you go and see Clifford Berriman's drawings in there, you will see lots and lots of donkeys and elephants. The donkey begins with Jackson, the jackass. The elephant begins, and why the elephant? Because so many Republicans who had fought on behalf of the Union, Union soldiers would say after they finally go into battle, they'd say, I've seen the elephant. This great thing, battle, carnage. Right? That's where the concept of the elephant comes from. GOP, of course, stands for Grand Old Party. Okay? And so this is the beginning of that, right? Of the elephant. Now we move on, and we're going to finish up now with Clifford Berriman. This is, the exhibit out there is Clifford Berriman. I want to note that the way that Clifford Berriman do it, he would draw these, pen and ink, then they would be photographed, they'd be turned into a glass plate negative. The glass plate that would be, shown onto a piece of copper. It would then be engraved, right, etched with acid. Then the ink would be put on it and laid over it. So actually, quite similar to going back to the engraving era of early cartoons. So really fast, we didn't have the technology that we could do today with all digital printing, right? So Berriman's cartoons, this one is probably one of his most famous ones because it's Berriman doing a self-portrait. He invents the teddy bear for Teddy Roosevelt, right? And the teddy bear is based off of this, right? So Roosevelt was a big game hunter. He is in Mississippi on a hunting trip. All of the rest of the party had managed to kill a black bear. Roosevelt had not had the opportunity to shoot one. One of his servants goes, sicks the dogs on a black bear, grabs the bear, ties it up to a tree, and says, there you go, Mr. President, shoot it. And Roosevelt wouldn't do it. He's like, that's not sporting. I'm not going to shoot that bear. And there's all these journalists that followed Roosevelt everywhere he went. And they wrote about it lovingly. Oh my God, Teddy Roosevelt. Now he killed everything else in his path, right? But the teddy bear comes out of this. And I always laugh with my students. I'm like, all right, how many of you guys have a teddy bear in your bed in your dorm right now? It's like, you didn't know it's Teddy Roosevelt who's sleeping with you, right? So unfortunately, the bear is so badly mauled by the dogs, it does not survive the rest of this. Yeah. So here's a better close-up of this. And I will tell you that the servant who ties up the bear is African-American, not white. So there's Roosevelt. I won't do it. Right? And then here's another, just one more example of a famous cartoon of Behrman's. And this is, and boys remember the Maine. And of course, the Maine blowing up in Havana Harbor in 1898 carries the United States into the Spanish-American War, which creates an entire new chapter in American history, American imperialism. So that's the history of political cartoons. Now, what questions or comments do you have?
No. It's on. Okay, so we do have a couple of minutes for some quick questions. We are running a little bit over time, but let's take a couple of minutes for some quick questions. So just raise your hand and I will come to you with a mic.
So these are all posters, is that right? I mean, we've been looking at all posters. So,
They generally would have been, anywhere from this to,
yeah.
that big 8.5 by 11, something like that.
At what point did they become printed in newspapers? I mean, political cartoons that you see in newspapers. When?
Generally speaking, really not until post-Civil War era. They didn't have the technology. They would print everything separately, right? So they would print the text, right? And then they would generally print the images separately. Now, there are examples early on, even in the colonial era, where much, much smaller images are printed in the newspapers. But those also would have been typeset, and it would have been the kind of image that the printer used so often that they could easily set it into the typeset. But besides that, it actually was technologically very difficult for them to do that.
Hi, this is more of an opinion question. So with the rise of the meme and the public's insatiable need for content, it's 24 hours with one image replacing the other. What do you think is the future of the political cartoon?
I don't think the political cartoon is going anywhere. If anything, it's become more replete. It's everywhere now. And people can make, we now have meme makers, right? We can make anything we want, right? The question becomes, how much does it get out there? And this is one of the things in regards to social media and social influencers. It depends on who sends it, right? So where it used to be the case where it was sort of produced in a way by the establishment or the elite or a political representation, now anybody can make cartoons. So where does it go from here? Everywhere. It's not going anywhere, though. We are an image-obsessed society. I take one look around us and at my students and in the way that our society has been created. What are tattoos? Right? Images that people are obsessed with now, placing images on their bodies as well. Some of those could very, very well be equated with the nature of cartoons and symbolism. See what I mean? Everywhere. It's not going anyplace.
All right, so we did have a couple of pre-submitted questions. Let me just read one out real quick. Do you know which U.S., and this is a question from Ryan, which U.S. president do you think was the most obsessed or concerned with how they were portrayed in mainstream political cartoons?
You know what? That one is really difficult because different presidents had different attitudes towards it. Roosevelt loved all the attention. Teddy Roosevelt. Jackson turned it on its head all the time. Reagan, for example, loved the attention of political cartoons. So I know that William Howard Taft got very upset with some of the cartoons, many of them because they were making fun of his weight, right? So you got to look at different presidents from different time periods. Some of them embraced it and laughed at it. Some of them really got quite upset over it. we're not going to go down this. We could talk about Trump and his reaction to some of the things. He, again, as a communicator, in many ways, whether you like him or don't like him, was actually quite a masterful communicator in twisting things and labeling things in simple ways. Gerald and I have talked a lot about this. He taught a great class on the age of Trump. Right? Nixon didn't like it at all. No, that's a great example. Nixon did not like the lampooning of him. He didn't like the images, and he didn't like the criticism, and of course, he had to resign. So, you had a question.
You mentioned the Alien Sedition Act. Did any of these cartoonists run afoul of that?
I am not familiar with any specific cartoons that are related to the Alien and Sedition Act, and I have looked for them, right? So I haven't found any. Right, so I don't know because I don't think there are many, if any, cartoons directly related to the Alien and Sedition Act. So the Alien and Sedition Acts are put in place in 1798 by the Federalist administration while John Adams is president, and they are designed, you cannot write, utter, publish, speak, criticize, say anything about the president or Congress. And if you do, you can be fined and or imprisoned. There's lots of Jeffersonian Republican newspaper editors who are arrested, fined, imprisoned for fairly, 6 months, 7 months for this. Absolutely a violation of the United States Constitution and the First Amendment. So there's plenty of newspaper writers and editors who are punished for it. I'm not aware of any cartoonists. Well, I think if you look at the Jacksonian era, they're not too worried of running afoul of Jackson in regards to all of this. And many of the cartoons that run well into the late 19th and 20th century are pretty mean-spirited. I think actually when you get to the 20th century, like Berriman's cartoons, they still have some sting to them, but it's not quite that same venomous bite that a lot of these other cartoons. Berriman was actually quite polite. It's why he had such a long career and was well regarded by people on both sides of the political aisle. I think even still a lot of cartoons today, though they can be pretty tough. I don't think they're generally, I don't know what the right word is. Well, seditious is in the eye of the beholder, right? I don't think they're generally, maybe it's profane. Not maybe in words, but really being brutal towards a politician. There are some that are out there that are pretty tough, but I don't think quite the way they were in the Jacksonian period. The Jacksonian period was a uniquely fraught and rowdy time. We're good? Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was amazing. And thank you, everybody, for coming down to the Old State House for this program. We have so many programs coming up. There are flyers on your chairs. There's also a couple right there on the table. We do have one coming up next Tuesday. Is National Voter Registration Day. And we are going to have a registration drive, a registration celebration right here at the Old State House from noon to 4 p.m. If you come and check your registration status, you get into the Old State House for free. And we're going to have a concert. We're going to have some panels. It's going to be a good time. So I hope to see you here next Tuesday. If you parked in State House Square Garage, we can validate the parking stub for you. The parking will be closing very, very soon. So if you do get locked out, there is a little panel with the phone number right outside the entrance to the parking garage, and they will let you in if you call that number. But if you do have your parking stub, I can validate it for you. And thank you everybody so much for coming. Thank you.